Seattle has a way of making the evening feel heavier than it should. The air carries that faint ocean dampness, the kind that seeps into your clothes and your bones, even if you've only been outside for a few minutes. That night, the sky was an unbroken sheet of gray, the streetlights already haloed by drizzle. I should have been heading home at my usual time, but a canceled meeting gave me the rare luxury of leaving the office before rush hour turned I-5 into a parking lot. It wasn't planned, coming home early. If anything, I was looking forward to surprising Kara. Maybe we'd cook dinner together, something simple. I even considered stopping for wine. But as I merged onto the 520 bridge toward Bellevue, I thought about the last few weeks. Kara had been distant. Not cold exactly, but her warmth had turned into something more performative, like she was reading from a script. I told myself I was imagining it. Still, that flicker of doubt was enough to make me skip the wine stop and head straight home. When I stepped inside, the first thing that hit me was the stillness. Our house in Madison Park usually had some sign of life. A pot simmering on the stove, music drifting in from her Bluetooth speaker, the muffled sound of her voice on a work call. That evening, there was nothing but the faint hum of the refrigerator. I set my keys in the ceramic bowl by the door, the clink echoing louder than usual. My coat felt heavier than normal when I shrugged it off. I can't say what exactly drew my eyes to the kitchen counter, but there it was, her tan leather tote bag. The zipper was pulled back halfway, a corner folded over. It wasn't the bag itself that caught my attention. It was the way it looked, abandoned. I told myself I had no reason to snoop, but I also knew Kara rarely left her bag open. She was meticulous about her things, almost to the point of being obsessive. Even the way she hung her coats, zipper up, collar straight, was deliberate. This bag sitting there, gaping open like an invitation, felt wrong. I took a step closer. Inside, I could see the pale rectangle of a hotel keycard. My first thought was that maybe it was from a work trip. She travels occasionally for product launches. But then I saw another one, tucked underneath. I pulled them both out, one in each hand. Archer Hotel, Bellevue. Identical branding. I've stayed there before, years ago for a conference. Upscale enough to be impressive, not so high-end as to be int*mid-ating. The kind of place you book intentionally, not by accident. I set the cards on the counter and reached further into the bag. My fingers brushed paper, smooth, folded. Printed receipt. My eyes scanned it. King-size room, 2 guests, Archer Hotel, Bellevue. 3 separate bookings, each for different dates within the past month. My pulse started to climb. I pulled out my phone almost without thinking, opened the rideshare app we occasionally share when one of us needs to cover the other's trip. 3 rides, same hotel, matching the dates on the receipt. My throat tightened. That's when I noticed something else, the kitchen. 2 wine glasses sat in the sink, droplets still clinging to the inside, like they hadn't been rinsed properly. One had a faint smudge of coral lipstick on the rim. The other had a deeper shade, more Berg *NDY. Kara owns neither. And then my eyes landed on the hoodie, draped over the back of a chair. Navy blue, oversized, worn soft from years of washes. Not mine, I don't wear that brand, and it was easily 2 sizes too big. I picked it up, holding it in my hands longer than I should have, staring at the faint fray along the cuffs. The sound of the back door opening startled me. I dropped the hoodie back over the chair like it was hot. Kara stepped in from the yard, phone still in her hand. She froze for half a beat when she saw me. "Oh, you're home early," she said. Her voice light but with that thin thread of surprise running through it. I held up the hotel keycards. "What are these?" She glanced at them, then at me, her expression smoothing out as if she'd rehearsed this moment. "Work-related," she said, her tone airy, casual. "We had to block some rooms for the launch team. You know how last-minute logistics can get." "And the wine glasses?" I asked. "Guests," she replied without missing a beat. "A couple of the team came over after work the other night while you were at your brother's. We opened a bottle." She gestured toward the sink, like the evidence explained itself. I didn't say anything about the hoodie, but she noticed my gaze linger on it. "One of them must have left that behind," she added, smiling faintly as if amused by the oversight. Then she did something that threw me. She tilted her head, looking at me with that faint frown she uses when she's trying to flip a conversation. "Ben, you've been wound so tight lately. Suspicious. Maybe you're just tired. You should take a weekend and go hiking or something. Get your head clear." It was subtle, the way she shifted the focus from her to me, but I felt it like a weight in my gut. I nodded slowly, sliding the key cards back onto the counter. "Yeah, maybe you're right." Inside, though, I was memorizing every detail: the lipstick colors, the brand of the hoodie, the exact dates on the receipt, the way she barely blinked when explaining it all away. When she turned toward the fridge, I watched her shoulders relax, as if the danger had passed. I didn't say another word, but I knew I'd just stepped into a different phase of our marriage, one where I no longer took anything she said at face value. On the drive to work the next morning, the wipers beat time across the windshield like a metronome, and every sweep cued another memory I'd ignored. None of them were smoking G***s by themselves, just ordinary moments I'd filed under busy season. Strung together, they felt like a pattern drawn in invisible ink finally held up to the light. Her phone, for instance. Kara used to leave it everywhere, on the coffee table, on the bathroom counter while she brushed her teeth. Screen lighting up with texts from her sisters and photos of our friends' kids. Lately, it lived face down. Always. Even at dinner. Even when we were just watching a game, feet tangled under the throw blanket. If it buzzed, she'd glance at me first, then slide it into her pocket with a smile like, "See? No big deal." When I asked why our shared calendar alerts had gone quiet, she shrugged and called it notification fatigue, then made a joke about how I'd put a calendar reminder on breathing if I could. I laughed because it was the kind of dig we used to trade without malice. Still, I went into the settings later and saw half her events muted and renamed to vague blocks: deep work, sync, personal. No locations, no guests. Location services became a battery issue. She'd disappear from Find My Right around 5:30, pop back on at 11:30, like a porch light wired to a timer. If we happened to text during those windows, her replies were oddly careful. Punctuation polished, tone neutral, nothing that placed her anywhere. Those nights, she stepped into the shower the second she got home, even in summer, rinsing like she was late to an appointment with the person she wanted to be. Eucalyptus steam hung in the hallway. I called it ritual. In my head, I labeled it reset. Then there was the lingerie. A new set drifted through our laundry. Expensive, delicate, slate blue. The exact shade she knows I like. I waited for it to make an appearance in our life. It never did. It went from tissue paper to laundry basket to drawer and back again like a ghost of an evening I hadn't been invited to. The yoga retreats were what finally made me start a notes file on my phone. Twice a month. She'd be gone for a Saturday, sometimes overnight, always with the same explanation. A studio on Bainbridge was running an immersive series. I looked up the schedule once on the ferry site, half curious, half petty, and didn't see anything that matched. Maybe it was a private thing, I told myself. Later, I noticed those retreats lined up, uncannily, with the travel calendar of a guy she'd mentioned at work, Jake, a project partner whose name had started showing up in stories more often than made sense. Jake thinks the launch is going to crush. Jake's team is late again. Jake wants to try a different vendor. I'd never met him. Somehow, he felt like someone who already knew where we kept the glasses. Receipts added their own rhythm. The same waterfront bar in Bellevue kept popping up on our card statements. Modest charges, 40 here, 60 there, nothing splashy, but recurring. I'd been there once with coworkers. It's the kind of place where servers learn your name if you come often enough, where the lighting forgives everything, where the windows look straight across at water that doesn't judge. Kara doesn't drink much, so I pictured mocktails with her team, a way to unwind near the lake after long days at the office. It was plausible, which made it dangerous. A co-working membership appeared to focus away from office chaos. The space happened to be 2 blocks from the Archer Hotel. I only noticed because the little branded fob kept slipping out of her wallet when we'd pay for groceries. I picked it up twice at Safeway and joked about how she was cheating on her office with a desk near the pastries. She grinned and kissed my cheek. I watched the smile fade when she turned away, like she'd set down a weight in front of me and didn't realize I could see it. Our shared calendar used to chirp like a reliable friend. Birthdays, vet appointments, her Pilates class, my dental cleanings, everything lived there. Then silence. When I opened the calendar, I found gray blocks where blue used to be, titles trimmed to optimism-free nouns, work, call, task. The alerts were off. The shared toggle disabled on half of them. I hovered my thumb over the screen, not sure if turning the toggle back on would out me as suspicious or as someone still trying. Texts became disappearing ink. I'd watch her type, see the preview bubble bloom, and then, a quick upward swipe, thread cleared down to a single okay. I don't need to read her messages. I never have, but absence has a weight. You notice when a bookshelf suddenly has gaps where your favorite novels used to be. Nights grew full of missing sentences. Cash withdrawals showed up like breadcrumbs, 20s and 50s from ATMs she didn't normally use, mostly around Bellevue and South Lake Union. We're a debit and receipts couple, boringly modern about money. I told myself she was tipping service staff in cash. I told myself a lot of things until the excuses started to sound rehearsed in my own voice. It wasn't just screens and statements. There were physical tells. A new perfume that lived in her car, not our house. Travel-sized, citrus and pepper. The kind that clings to upholstery and lingers in your shirt hours after you've carried in the groceries. A tote bag lighter by a laptop but heavier with a spare charger, multi-outlet, travel toothbrush, and a makeup pouch that never migrated inside. A yoga mat in the trunk, still pristine, the corner factory sharp. On the passenger floor, a folded parking receipt with a digital barcode and the Archer's logo half visible where the fold had worn thin. At night, she fell asleep turned away from me. Not cold, exactly, just unavailable. Like a hotel room with a do not disturb sign dangling from the inside. When I reached for her shoulder, she'd place her hand over mine and squeeze. An affectionate period at the end of a sentence I hadn't finished. I started running earlier, looping the waterfront before sunrise, trying to put the feeling somewhere my legs could carry it. Seattle mornings have a way of making you honest. You can see your breath and your thoughts at the same time. I'd get home to a neatly made bed and the faint hum of her white noise app still open on the nightstand as if the phone had been busy standing in for someone. Once, I walked past the co-working space on my lunch break. Through the front glass, I saw a row of booths, slate and blonde wood potted plants performing oxygen. A chalkboard listed quiet hours in careful hand lettering. I didn't see Kara, which, objectively, meant nothing. On the way back, I stopped at a light and watched the Archer's awning ripple in the wind. The valet flipped a key ring through his fingers and laughed at something I couldn't hear. It felt like the city was sending me messages in semaphore I'd never learned. I told nobody. Not my brother. Not the guys from work. Not the barista who reads faces for sport. I just collected. I wrote dates and times and quotes in that notes file like I was preserving a language I'd soon be forced to translate. Phone face down at dinner. Shower 11:52 p.m. Eucalyptus. Uber to Bellevue, 7:14 p.m. Work drinks. Cash, $60. SLU ATM. Retreat, Bainbridge. Same weekend as Jake's Portland trip. It felt clinical and it felt necessary. One Thursday, I tried an experiment so small it felt harmless. I added a calendar event called Dinner with Ben, Sushi on 45th, and invited her. I watched the little gray circle with the question mark linger beside her name for an hour before it flipped to maybe, then, quietly, vanished from my view altogether. Later, she said, "I'm slammed. How about next week?" Next week never happened. Another night, she mentioned a late vendor call and took it from the backyard. Through the window, I could see her pacing near the fence, her free hand drawing shapes in the air. It was cool enough to see little clouds when she exhaled, except there were none. Her breath didn't plume because she wasn't talking. She was listening. I stood by the sink and counted the seconds between her and yeah and totally, and realized that the silence between those sounds was longer than the words themselves. The bar on the waterfront became a landmark in my head. I drove past one evening on my way back from a late meeting and pulled into the lot like I'd been magnetized. Inside, it smelled like cedar and citrus and the end of a long week. I sat at the bar and ordered water, then asked the bartender if they still did a lavender lemonade. It was something Kara liked once at a place in Ballard. He nodded, started mixing, and asked if I wanted it like she gets it, with the lemon peel twist. The question hit me sideways. I said sure. He set the glass down with a casual, "She's in here with the tech crowd a lot," then wiped the counter like nothing had happened. I stared at the condensation ring and tried to decide if I was being paranoid or observant. The line between the two kept moving. I went home and opened our rideshare history again. 3 trips to the Archer on nights that used to be ours. Tuesdays when we made tacos and tried a new hot sauce. Saturdays we'd normally turn into movie marathons. The app showed little car icons marching across the map in neat diagonals. I ***ed the paths and felt ridiculous, and also like I had just printed a map of my own house with a room circled, "Do not enter." On Sunday, she said she was heading to her co-working cave to finish a deck. I kissed her goodbye and asked if she wanted me to bring her dinner later. She said no, grabbed the tote with the travel toothbrush still tucked inside, and left. I waited an hour, then drove to the co-working building and sat across the street with a coffee going cold in my hands. People came and went. Every time the door opened, I looked up. The Archer's awning rippled in my peripheral vision like a flag I'd decided not to salute. At 8:30, I gave up and drove home feeling like a man who had tried to trap smoke in a jar. It would have been easier to confront her then, to put all the little pieces on the table and ask her to name the picture. But I knew how that conversation would go. She'd tell me I was tired, overworked, seeing patterns where there were none. She'd give everything a clean, clever name and I'd be left holding a handful of labels. So I waited. I kept my voice even when she said retreat and late and deadline. I nodded when she laughed too hard at her own excuses. And each night, when she set her phone face down between us on the couch like a quiet referee, I felt the line between us harden. By the end of the week, I could describe the shape of the absence better than the shape of us. Once you can do that, you're not guessing anymore. You're remembering. And memories, when they line up like that, don't argue. They point. It didn't arrive as a confession or a dramatic slip-up. It arrived because our family Apple ID is stubborn, and because I am, too. I was making coffee on a Sunday when the shared iPad chimed from the couch with that cheerful ping that always sounds like a kid raising his hand. Kara was in the shower. I wiped my thumb and opened the Photos app to clear the clutter the way I always do. Accidental bursts? ***TS of coupons. The random selfies my niece takes when she visits. A new album sat at the top, Recents, with a thumbnail I didn't recognize. A corner of a gray headboard. Tufted, hotel grade, Archer gray. I tapped it. The first image was Kara, arm outstretched, the kind of angle you take when you're sending proof of life to a friend. She was in a mirror, hair tousled, wearing that slate blue set I'd been waiting to see. The lamp behind her was the Archer's, easily identifiable if you've ever stayed there. The window shades were the heavy woven kind hotels love because they yank down clean and pretend night can be arranged. On the dresser, a digital parking pass lay half-slid from a leather valet tray with. I should have closed the app. Instead, I scrolled. The next photo was the bed, king, white duvet smoothed like a truce. 2 room keys on the nightstand, the same ones I'd found in her tote. Another ***T. Her wrist against a warm shoulder that wasn't mine, cropped to conceal a face but not the fact. A man's collarbone, a freckle constellation, the outline of a hoodie I'd already held in my hands. A mirror selfie caught half his torso. Navy tee, lanyard looped casually in a pocket, Archer logo glinting. She. My chest did that hollow elevator drop thing. I took a photo of the iPad with my phone. A stupid reflex, as if I needed to prove to myself later that this happened. Messages began to populate too, the way Apple likes to helpfully sync your life whether you asked or not. A thread titled J Work slid into view. I opened it and watched the blue and gray bubbles stack into a tower I wanted to push over. Her. Weekly block still on? 4 to 7? Jake. Yep. I'll grab the parking again. Same spot. Need anything? Her. Just you. I scrolled. Her compliance is nosy. I'll rename the expenses. Consulting. Jake. LOL. I'll invoice you with a smiley. There were Apple Cash transfers labeled consulting fees. $120. $80. $150. Small enough to look boring. Regular enough to tell a story. Then came the calendar invites tucked between work emails that had also synced. Partner review, offsite with a Bellevue address that was not an office. A message from facilities about appropriate conduct between project partners, linked to a policy PDF I didn't need to open to understand. Another email, forwarded by Kara to her personal account, carried a thread where someone had flagged spending anomalies, double charges at the bar, mileage that didn't map to client sites. The subject line was an ANV. I didn't rage. I sat back, let the iPad rest against my knees, and breathed like I was trying to remember how. The shower cut off. Water ticked in the pipes. I locked the screen and set it face down on the cushion as if the truth might drain away if I kept it still. In the mirror, when she came down the hall, Kara looked like Sunday morning. Sweats, hair in a towel, a kind of effortless pretty I'd loved since the day we met. She kissed the top of my head and asked if the beans tasted burnt again. My mouth was a desert. They're fine, I said, because everything I wanted to say felt like dropping a match in a forest. When she went back to the bedroom, I picked up the iPad and did the thing I knew I would have to do eventually. I made backups. I airdropped the photos to my phone and then to my laptop. I exported the message thread to a PDF. I took *TS of the parking passes with the plate number I now knew by heart. I copied the emails, the calendar invites, the transfers. I labeled a folder utilities and put everything inside like I was cleaning a garage. Then I called a lawyer. He answered on the second ring. I explained enough to get past the intake questions and gave my name. He asked for facts, not feelings, and I found that I had plenty of both. "Do you own your home?" he asked. "In whose name?" I told him about the trust, about the prenup, about the house in Renton that predates the marriage. He said words like separate property and enforceable and documentation. And the part of me that had been drifting found the floor again. When we hung up, I forwarded what I had to a private email and copied a version to a drive only I could see. I wasn't trying to be dramatic. I was trying to be careful. I knew that once a conversation started, the story would try to write itself without me. I wanted my copy. That afternoon, while Kara ran an errand that did not require her yoga mat, I opened our laptop and watched the cloud do what clouds do, carry things. More photos trickled in, time-stamped, geotagged when she'd forgotten to turn off the setting. I saw the Archer's coordinates, the cute captions sent to Jay Work, her bare feet against the hotel carpet with a caption that read, "Office hours." The metadata didn't lie. It never does. It only waits. I took one last pass through the mail app and saw the HR policy thread again. This time with a reply from Jake I hadn't noticed earlier. "We're aligned. We'll keep it discreet." Discreet, I thought, is just another word for temporary. I put the iPad back where it had been, screen dark. I cleaned the coffee mugs. I opened the window to let in air that didn't know our names. And when Kara came home, humming the song she always hums when she thinks a day belongs to her, I smiled. Not because I forgave anything, but because the performance had entered a new act, and I knew my lines now. Listen, document, and don't argue with a camera roll. Confirmation didn't make me brave. It made me disciplined. It made me collect the pieces of my life like I was packing a suitcase in a hotel room that someone else had booked. It made me remember who I was before I learned a stranger's barcode. It made me ready for the next step. Before bed, I tested the sync again. I sent the iPad a throwaway photo, a rain-dark cedar in our yard, and watched it appear, time-stamped. In hidden, a short video waited. The room, her laugh, smaller, private. A man's voice, "Your trouble." Hers, "Only with you." The camera dipped, catching the edge of his jaw and the hoodie string I knew too well. 23 seconds. Enough. I didn't confront her. Not yet. I saved the clip, checked the backups, and set the iPad to sleep. Then I brushed my teeth and met my eyes in the mirror. The guessing was over. I slept not well but without doubt. Morning put on its usual gray. Kara stirred cream into her coffee and asked about my day. I told her I had errands. True enough. I had a plan, a folder, and proof that didn't blink. The thing about having confirmation is that it changes your posture toward the problem. Before, I'd been a man bracing for impact, unsure, waiting for the hit. Now I was standing in the wreckage, picking out which pieces belonged to me and which I could leave behind. I didn't rush. Rushing is messy, and messy gives people excuses. Instead, I opened a notebook I hadn't used in years, the kind with ruled pages and a spine that stays flat, and started a list. First, call my lawyer back. We'd already spoken after the iPad sync incident, but now I had enough in hand to turn possible into certain. I told him I wanted to review the prenuptial agreement, especially the part about the rent and house being separate property through the family trust. He confirmed what I already suspected. The house was untouchable. No division. No buyout. It had been mine before Kara and I ever stood in front of a justice of the peace. Second, the finances. I pulled up every joint account we had, checking, savings, the credit cards we used for points. I closed the credit lines, converted my direct deposit to my individual account, and moved my share of the savings into a bank Kara had never set foot in. On the statements, it would look like numbers quietly stepping out of one column and into another. No drama. Third, an inventory. This part was tedious but oddly grounding. I walked through each room with my phone, taking slow, steady video. Furniture, art, electronics, even the way the books were stacked on the shelves. If she claimed later that something had been hers, or worse, if something went missing before she left, I'd have a time-stamped record. Fourth, the work angle. If the affair had been just personal, that would have been one thing. But Jake was a project partner, and the consulting fees she'd been funneling to him weren't just dirty. They were potentially actionable. I didn't want to destroy her out of spite. I wanted leverage. And leverage in a situation like this meant making sure she couldn't rewrite the story in her favor. That night, I sent an anonymous packet to her company's compliance department. Not vindictive, just clinical. Screensh *TS of the hotel receipts disguised as expenses, the cash transfers labeled as consulting, the emails coordinating off-site partner reviews, at a Bellevue address with no office attached. I didn't need to embellish, reality had already done the heavy lifting. While the compliance team's auto-reply confirmed receipt, I backed up the entire message chain from her and Jake. Photos, parking passes, even the stupid inside jokes they texted that now felt like bad fiction. I put it all on an encrypted drive, then mirrored it to a spare I locked in my desk. The last piece of my plan wasn't about money or property. It was about time. I picked a date 3 weeks from now for her move out. Not whenever you can. Not when it's convenient. I would give her formal notice in writing that as she wasn't on the deed or the utilities, she was considered a guest. And guests, under state law, can be told when their stay is over. It was strange how calm I felt setting all this in motion. I think it was because every step took me further from the chaos of suspicion and closer to the clarity of action. I wasn't pacing the kitchen at midnight wondering where she was. I was deciding which key cards to drop into a Ziploc marked evidence. That evening, Kara breezed in with her usual mix of faux fatigue and brightness, tossing her tote on the counter. "Long day," she said, leaning in to kiss my cheek. I let her, not because I wanted it, but because sometimes the easiest way to keep a game going is to play along until you've set the rules yourself. While she microwaved leftovers, I stood in the doorway and asked about her week, neutral, easy. She launched into a story about a vendor escalation that had kept everyone scrambling, complete with just enough jargon to make it sound authentic. I nodded at the right places, filed away the details. Upstairs, after she'd gone to bed, I drafted the move-out plan. 2 pages. One for her, one for me. Hers outlined the dates, the logistics, and the fact that her personal items would be boxed and stored in the garage for pickup. Mine was a checklist: utilities, locks, mail forwarding, the deep clean-eyed book for the day after she left. This wasn't revenge. It was control. And control, after months of feeling like the ground kept shifting under me, was something I wasn't willing to give back. By the end of the week, the first ripples had already started. My lawyer emailed to say he'd received a call from her company's counsel. Not about me, but about an ongoing matter that might require testimony. Compliance had moved fast. I didn't celebrate. I didn't need to. All I had to do was keep the plan on track and let the consequences arrive on their own. And they would. I didn't have to wait long for the dominoes to start tipping. It began 3 days after I sent the anonymous packet to her company. I came home from a run along the waterfront to find Kara in the kitchen, sitting rigid at the counter with her laptop open and her phone face down beside it. The laptop screen glowed with a paused video call, corporate background blurred, the kind of thing people do when they don't want you to see their actual surroundings. She was staring at the floor like it might give her better news. "Bad day?" I asked, keeping my voice neutral. She glanced up, startled. "Just work." It wasn't just work. I could see it in the way she didn't start typing again when I walked in. How her eyes had that same unfocused glaze they got when she was rehearsing a story before telling it out loud. Later, when she left to take a walk, her laptop gave me more than she intended. A pop-up notification lingered in the corner. Compliance meeting rescheduled. Mandatory attendance. By the end of that week, her project was officially on hold. I didn't hear it from her. Kara preferred to keep up appearances, but from a mutual acquaintance in her industry who texted me with a not-so-subtle, "Hey, is everything okay with Kara?" Heard her big launch got frozen. That same night, Jake's system access was suspended, pending review. The news wasn't public, but LinkedIn gossip is faster than any press release. His profile quietly switched to seeking new opportunities within days. Kara's tone at home shifted. Less confident, more brittle. She started peppering conversations with vague references to office politics and misunderstandings, the kind of soft-focused language people use when they're trying to blur hard edges. Our acquaintances, people who had once been in and out of our house for dinners, wine nights, game nights, began peeling away. At first, I thought I was imagining it, but the drop-off was too sudden to ignore. Text chains with 6 or 7 names went silent or splintered into smaller groups without us. It didn't take a genius to figure out why. At some point, word had gotten out. Not just about her and Jake, but about her asking around for short-term loans from a couple of these same people. Loans she'd framed as bridging until bonus payout, but which now looked a lot like patching holes she'd made herself. People hate feeling used more than they hate being lied to. The reaction was swift. The invitations stopped, the casual check-ins dried up, and the people who still spoke to her did so in clipped, polite sentences that ended as soon as they could gracefully excuse themselves. Meanwhile, I kept moving through my plan. The inventory was done, the savings were secure, the move-out date was locked. I'd boxed up the first round of her personal things. Clothes, toiletries, random kitchen gadgets she'd bought on whims. Each box was labeled with her name and stacked neatly in the garage, just far enough from my own things to make the separation clear. It didn't go unnoticed. One evening, she came in from the garage holding a box marked "Closet Shoes." "You've been packing my stuff?" she asked, her voice carrying a mix of disbelief and something like fear. "Yes," I said simply. "Makes it easier for you when the time comes." She set the box down harder than she needed to. "The time comes for what?" "For you to leave," I replied without raising my voice. "We've been over this." Her eyes darted to mine, searching for a crack. "Ben, you can't just—" "I can," I said, and I didn't need to say more. She knew about the trust. She knew she was legally a guest here. The conversation ended without her consent, which is to say it ended. Around that time, I noticed she was making more calls from the patio at night. Her voice was low, sometimes sharp, sometimes pleading. I didn't need to know the details. I knew the pattern: damage control. And yet, she couldn't seem to get ahead of it. The compliance department pressed on. Finance kept asking for documentation, and Jake had quietly stopped taking her calls altogether. I knew because one night, through the open kitchen window, I heard her leave a voicemail that began with, "Jake, please pick up," and ended with a long, shaky breath before she hung up. She started staying out later, but now it wasn't for trysts or secret dinners. It was because the house felt inhospitable to her, a place where her things were in boxes and her name wasn't on the bills. When she was home, She moved through the rooms like a guest. No music playing from her phone. No laptop sprawled across the coffee table. No half-drunk glass of wine abandoned on the counter. The few mutual acquaintances who still spoke to me didn't mince words. One told me bluntly, "She's burned through every ounce of goodwill she had." Another just shook their head and said, "I don't know how she thought she could spin this." If Kara noticed the shift in public sentiment, she didn't admit it. But I saw it in the way she carried herself. Shoulders pulled in, eyes scanning before she walked into a room, checking for who might be watching. By the second week, I'd stopped engaging with her entirely beyond the logistical. I'd leave notes on the counter, dinner in the fridge, box in garage, mail on table. She responded with 1 or 2-word replies, if at all. The silence wasn't cruel. It was deliberate. I wanted her to understand that the emotional connection she'd taken for granted was no longer available here. And in that quiet, her isolation grew. The night before the compliance team's scheduled in-person interview, I passed her in the hallway. She looked tired, really tired, the kind of fatigue that doesn't come from work alone. She opened her mouth like she was about to say something personal, something that might have started with, "I'm sorry," but the words never came. Instead, she just asked, "Do you need anything from the store?" "No," I said, and walked past. The following afternoon, her car was still in the driveway hours after she'd usually be at the office. I didn't ask why. I already knew. The interview hadn't gone well, and the walls were closing in faster than she could find a door. She'd made her choices. The consequences weren't mine to carry, and they were only just beginning to arrive.